What Dalio got wrong is the reason that these countries did well in the time frames that they did is that their geography matched up to the premier technologies of the day. Before deep water navigation, the most powerful country was the country with the best maritime internal transport system. That was Ottoman Turkey. But then deep water navigation kicked in, and so the center of power shifted over to Iberia because they were on the end of a peninsula, and it was easier for the Portuguese and the Spanish to push out through the water and conquer the world than to go through Europe. Eventually, that technology migrated to places that could use it better, like the Brits. And then the Brits developed industrialization, and industrialization allowed them to bring a gun to a knife fight for a century. But then that technology moved to an area with better capital density that could use it better. That was Germany and the United States. So it's not that he's wrong about those arcs, but it's not like they have a use-by date. It's a question of what the technologies of the day tend to be and which geography can use those best. I am, at the moment, not convinced that the digital age is a fundamentally sufficient break from the industrial age to trigger something new. But even if it is, something to consider that 90% of all the silicon that goes into all of the world's microchips comes from North Carolina. I'm bummed that globalization is ending. It's created the best period in human history. But I'm really excited to see what's next, because if you've got North America really fundamentally remaking itself in less than a decade, that is going to change the American story and the Mexican story and the Canadian story. And that's going to take us some unpredictable ways. Hopefully most of them are going to be good. And on the back side of this, after everything cracks apart, fast forward 10, 15, probably closer to 30, 35 years, and we'll probably have a better battery system, and we'll have a better transmission system, and then we can go back out in the world and basically remake it from the ground up. It's a great time to be alive if you're in the right spot. I am concerned about a series of brushfire wars as countries try to take matters into their own hands. But a lot of the countries that we've been convinced of that are significant long-term threats, most notably China and Iran, really are the countries that are going to suffer the most from globalization's fall. They really do need American overwatch in order to make sure that they can import and export. And without that, they are utterly incapable of managing that themselves. In the pre-globalized world, unless you had iron ore and steel and food and oil, you'd never industrialized. With globalization, now you only needed one, or just a bunch of labor that you could use to buy all of it. Globalization made the world safe for civilian corporate traffic the world over. You take that away, and you're now trading on your own internal market, your own security environment, your own economic geography, and the world we're going to go to is going to have a lot more in common with the 1840s than the 1940s, because everyone is industrialized and modernized, but they're dependent on products coming from half a world away that just aren't going to be there. Now, if that's a car, that's bad. If that's wheat, that's worse. Globalization allowed us to farm things out. Everyone focused on what they did best and most efficiently, even if they were tilting the balance like the Chinese did with subsidies in order to make it happen. That meant we've got sprawling supply chains that round the world. Most manufacturing processes, especially in electronics, touch at least a dozen different countries. We now have to unwind all that, and we have to put it on a more stable system with shorter supply chains that are closer to home. And NAFTA is well set up to do this. But this transition period means we have to double the size of our industrial plant in just 5 years if the goal is to still have the products that we're used to today. That's hugely inflationary. But think about what it means. Doubling the size of the industrial plant, having locals produce products for locals, partnering with the Mexicans and the Canadians to make it happen at scale. This is going to be the greatest economic growth in the history of all three of the NAFTA countries. And when it's done, we will largely be immune to international shocks because all the work will be done here. This is a good story, but it's not a straight road from here to there. I have always been a maps guy. It's been my job to communicate to clients my entire professional year about how the world fits together, why it fits together the way it does. And once you understand the tools of geography and demography, you can then have a much better idea of what is going to evolve or devolve in the weeks, years, months to come. And we are now standing at the precipice. Well, actually, no, that's not quite right. We've just kind of took a big step off the ledge in the last couple of years. The globalized system as we understand it, is breaking down, and it's my job to help figure out what that means for different companies in different parts of the world and different economic sectors. Well, the biggest change happened within a week of me turning in the final draft at the start of the Ukraine war. Luckily, the publisher allowed me to go in and change a few verb tenses. So it was instead, Russia will do this inevitably and almost imminently into, Russia started this last February, and here's where we are. The key thing to remember, though, is that the prediction of the Ukraine war wasn't just from this book. It was from previous books as well. And when you have deglobalization really kick in, it's only one of 3 conflicts. So we do have 2 others that are just around the corner that are going to be just as disruptive.
Which would be what?
Now that the United States is no longer in the Persian Gulf in any meaningful way, the Saudis and the Iranians are edging ever closer to a direct fight, and that's going to catch half of the world's globally traded oil in the crossfire. And then whether it's because the Chinese lash out or implode, we're going to have another conflict in the East Asian Rim with the Chinese and the Japanese being the primary belligerents. And then that's the end of global manufacturing as we understand it. Well, let me give you the punchline first. This is China's last decade as a coherent nation state. So we're going to be very soon talking about Chinese weakness and the effect of China's disintegration. But let me give you 3 big reasons. First of all, like that chapter that you quoted, there is nothing that is made in China that can't be made anywhere else. And because their demographics have been aging so aggressively for so long, their labor costs are now about 3 times what the labor costs of Mexico are. And Chinese labor is not as highly skilled as Mexican labor. So we've already seen the hemorrhaging out of the industrial space, most notably to Mexico and Vietnam, but some to the United States as well. In fact, the United States is competing on some of these sectors that we honestly had given up on, because now with the shale revolution, our energy prices are the lowest in the world. Our electricity prices are the lowest in the world. So we're in this weird world where the United States excels at the high end and the low end at the same time, while the Mexicans take care of everything in the middle. It's a very successful system, and it's outcompeting the Chinese on most metrics. Second, the Chinese do not have the naval capacity to push out from their own coast. Yes, they've got a lot of vessels, but only about 10% of them can sail more than 1,000 miles from the coast, and that assumes no one's shooting at them and they're going slow to save fuel. Really, the operational range for the Chinese Navy is only about 300 miles. So they can't get past Vietnam, much less to the Persian Gulf if there's an energy crisis. And then third, back to those demographics. Since the book came out, the Chinese have been updating bit by bit their census data, and they've now come to the public conclusion that they overcounted their population by in excess of 100 million people, with all of those missing millions aged 40 and under. If that is true, and I can't imagine that they'd be bad-mouthing themselves to make themselves look good. I mean, the logic of that's weird. If that's true, we are talking about the fastest workforce and population decline ever in human history. And we don't even have an economic model as a species for what will work with a Chinese system just 5-10 years from now, because they won't have enough people to do the work, and they certainly won't have enough people to consume. And that leaves them completely dependent upon whether the United States wants to import stuff from them. And it's become very clear in our politics under both Trump and Biden that the answer to that is no.